Biography of Gordon Allport. In the fall of 1920, a 22-year-old American philosophy and economics student was visiting with an older brother in Vienna. During his visit, the young man penned a note to Sigmund Freud requesting an appointment. Freud, then the world's most famous psychiatrist, agreed to see the young man and suggested a specific time for a meeting. The young American arrived at number 19 Berggasse in plenty of time for his appointment with Dr. Freud. At the designated time, Freud opened the door to his consulting room and quietly ushered the young man inside. The American visitor suddenly realized that he had nothing to say. Searching his mind for some incident that might interest Freud, he remembered seeing a small boy on the tramcar that day while traveling to Freud's home. The little boy, about 4 years old, displayed an obvious dirt phobia, constantly complaining to his well-starched mother about the filthy conditions on the car. Freud listened silently to the story and then with a typical Freudian technique asked his young visitor if he was in reality talking about himself. Feeling guilty, the young man managed to change the subject and to escape without too much further embarrassment. The American visitor to Freud's consulting room was Gordon Alport, and this encounter was the spark that ignited his interest in personality theory. Back in the United States, Allport began to wonder if there might be room for a third approach to personality, one that borrowed from traditional psychoanalysis and animal-driven learning theories, but also one that adopted a more humanistic stance. Allport quickly completed work for a PhD in psychology and embarked on a long and distinguished career as a staunch advocate for the study of the individual. Overview of Allport's psychology of the individual. More than any other personality theorist, Gordon Allport emphasized the uniqueness of the individual. He believed that attempts to describe people in terms of general traits rob them of their unique individuality. For this reason, Allport objected to trait and factor theories that tend to reduce individual behaviors to common traits. He insisted, for example, that one person's stubbornness is different from any other person's stubbornness, and the manner in which one person's stubbornness interacts with his or her extroversion and creativity is duplicated by no other individual. Consistent with Allport's emphasis on each person's uniqueness was his willingness to study in depth a single individual. He called the study of the individual morphogenic science and contrasted it with the nomothetic methods used by most other psychologists. Morphogenic methods are those that gather data on a single individual, whereas nomothetic methods gather data on groups of people. Allport also advocated an eclectic approach to theory building. He accepted some of the contributions of Freud, Maslow, Rogers, Eysenck, Skinner, and others, but he believed that no one of these theorists is able to adequately explain the total growing and unique personality. To Allport, a broad, comprehensive theory is preferable to a narrow, specific theory even if it does not generate as many testable hypotheses. Allport argued against particularism, or theories that emphasize a single aspect of personality. In an important warning to other theorists, he cautioned them not to forget what you have decided to neglect. In other words, no theory is completely comprehensive, and psychologists should always realize that much of human nature is not included in any single theory. To Allport, a broad, comprehensive theory is preferable to a narrow, specific theory even if it does not generate as many testable hypotheses. Gordon Willard Alport was born on November 11, 1897, in Montezuma, Indiana, the fourth and youngest son of John E. Alport and Nellie Wise Alport. Allport's father had engaged in a number of business ventures before becoming a physician at about the time of Gordon's birth. Lacking adequate office and clinical facilities, Dr. Alport turned the household into a miniature hospital. Both patients and nurses were found in the home, and a clean, sterile atmosphere prevailed. Cleanliness of action was extended to cleanliness of thought. In his autobiography, Allport wrote that his early life was marked by plain Protestant piety. Floyd Allport, his older brother by 7 years, who also became a famous psychologist, described their mother as a very pious woman who placed heavy emphasis on religion. As a former schoolteacher, she taught young Gordon the virtues of clean language and proper conduct as well as the importance of searching for ultimate religious answers. By the time Gordon was 6 years old, The family had moved 3 times, finally settling in Cleveland, Ohio. Young Alport developed an early interest in philosophical and religious questions and had more facility for words than for games. He described himself as a social isolate who fashioned his own circle of activities. Although he graduated second in his high school class of 100, he did not consider himself an inspired scholar. In the fall of 1915, Alport entered Harvard, following in the footsteps of his brother Floyd, who had graduated 2 years earlier and who at that time was a graduate assistant in psychology. In his autobiography, Gordon Allport, 1967, wrote, "Almost overnight my world was remade. My basic moral values, to be sure, had been fashioned at home. What was new was the horizon of intellect and culture I was now invited to explore." His enrollment at Harvard also marked the beginning of a 50-year association with that university, which was only twice briefly interrupted. When he received his bachelor's degree in 1919 with a major in philosophy and economics, he was still uncertain about a future career. He had taken undergraduate courses in psychology and social ethics, and both disciplines had made a lasting impression on him. When he received an opportunity to teach in Turkey, he saw it as a chance to find out whether he would enjoy teaching. He spent the academic year 1919 to 1920 in Europe teaching English and sociology at Robert College in Istanbul. While in Turkey, Alport was offered a fellowship for graduate study at Harvard. He also received an invitation from his brother Fayette to stay with him in Vienna, where Fayette was working for the U.S. Trade Commission. In Vienna, Alport had the meeting with Sigmund Freud that we briefly described in the introduction to this chapter. This meeting with Freud greatly influenced Alport's later ideas on personality. With a certain audacity, the 22-year-old Alport wrote to Freud announcing that he was in Vienna and offered the father of psychoanalysis an opportunity to meet with him. The encounter proved to be a fortuitous life-altering event for Alport. Not knowing what to talk about, the young visitor told Freud about seeing a small boy on the tramcar earlier that day. The young child complained to his mother about the filthy conditions of the car and announced that he did not want to sit near passengers whom he deemed to be dirty. Alport claimed that he chose this particular incident to get Freud's reaction to a dirt phobia in a child so young, but he was quite flabbergasted when Freud fixed his kindly therapeutic eyes upon me and said, "And was that little boy you?" Alport said he felt guilty and quickly changed the topic. Alport told this story many times, seldom changing any words, and never revealing the rest of his lone encounter with Freud. However, Alan Elms has uncovered Alport's written description of what happened next. After realizing that Freud was expecting a professional consultation, Alport then talked about his dislike of cooked raisins. "I told him I thought it due to the fact that at the age of 3, a nurse had told me they were bugs." Freud asked, "When you recalled this episode, did your dislike vanish?" I said, "No." He replied, "Then you are not at the bottom of it." When Alport returned to the United States, he immediately enrolled in the PhD program at Harvard. After finishing his degree, he spent the following 2 years in Europe studying under the great German psychologists Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler, William Stern, Heinz Werner, and others in Berlin and Hamburg. In 1924, he returned again to Harvard to teach, among other classes, a new course in the psychology of personality. In his autobiography, Alport suggested that this course was the first personality course offered in an American college. The course combined social ethics and the pursuit of goodness and morality with the scientific discipline of psychology. It also reflected Alport's strong personal dispositions of cleanliness and morality. 2 years after beginning his teaching career at Harvard, Alport took a position at Dartmouth College. 4 years later, he returned to Harvard and remained there for the rest of his professional career. In 1925, Alport married Ada Lufkin Gould, whom he had met when both were graduate students. Ada Alport, who received a master's degree in clinical psychology from Harvard, had the clinical training that her husband lacked. She was a valuable contributor to some of Gordon's work, especially his 2 extensive case studies: The Case of Jenny Gove Masterson, discussed in the section titled The Study of the Individual, and the Case of Marion Taylor, which was never published. The Allports had one child, Robert, who became a pediatrician and thus sandwiched Alport between two generations of physicians, a fact that seemed to have pleased him in no small measure. Alport's awards and honors were many. In 1939, he was elected president of the American Psychological Association, APA. In 1963, he received the Gold Medal Award of the APA. In 1964, he was awarded the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award of the APA, and in 1966, he was honored as the first Richard